Hello, everyone, and welcome to our dual feed versus walking foot webinar. We are so excited to be presenting this for you for our second session. Just a couple of announcements before I turn it over to our presenter. There are a couple of handouts in your control panel, which should be to the right side of your screen. There's available for download there, so if you want to go ahead and download those now, feel free to. If not, no worries. This webinar is being recorded and it's going to get posted to bernina.com, and it will also come with the handout. So you can just wait till then, and then you can reference back to the video. Also, if you have questions anytime throughout the presentation, there is a questions tab in the control panel, and you can type your questions anytime. We'll sort through those and get them answered at the end of the webinar. I think that's all I have to talk about. So now I'll turn it over to our presenter. We have with us BERNINA Educator Sylvain Bergeron.
Thank you, Megan. Hello, everyone. Today we're talking about feeding fabric, which is what a sewing machine does just about most of the time, except for free motion, of course. And we're going to start. We'll have a little video in a second that shows the basics of how the machine feeds, and then how the dual feed interacts with that, or how the walking foot interacts with that. So before we do, though, not everybody has a dual feed capable machine. Everybody has access to a walking foot for their BERNINA. So let me ask you, we'll put the poll up. Which one do you use the most? Walking foot or dual feed, and what kind of proportions?
All right, Sylvain, the poll is open and people are already voting, so.
Cool. Should we can we put the slides on at the same time, or should we wait for the poll?
The poll actually takes over on the slide, okay, so it'll take up the whole screen. Yeah.
Cool. So when you think you have results, you feel free to.
All right, the results are on the screen now for everyone to see. So just like this morning session, everyone, the most votes went to dual feed, using dual feed more than the walking foot. 11% for dual feed only, 11% for walking foot only, and then 13% for walking foot more than dual feed.
So it's about 1 to 5 dual walking foot versus dual feed, and it's my rule of thumb when people ask me which one is best, do I need both? I always tell people that dual feed is 5 times the convenience. Walking foot is 5 times the performance, namely because the walking foot has basically 5 times the double transport surface from the top compared to the dual feed. And you'll see the details visually. So that's cool. That's pretty much in line with what we expected based on this morning's result. So it's perfect. So with that, you know what? Before we go to the slides, let's show a video. Well, before we show the video, let me give you a little review on feeding. When you have 2 pieces of fabric, you have a feed dog underneath that's moving 1 layer of the fabric. You rely on the 2 following each other, and the stitching that's already done is anchoring them, so that helps. A couple of things there. The presser foot is actually causing drag on the upper layer. That's why typically you will see that the upper layer, when you're done sewing, exceeds a little bit. And if you push with your hands, if you try to help, that gets even worse. So if you just use a feed dog, no feeding aid, you basically want to just hold your layers together and let the machine take the fabric from you. You can even oppose a tiny little bit of resistance so the fabric stays kind of taut without stretching it, of course, but just let the machine take the fabric, and that creep, if you want, that skid will not happen as much. But there are times you actually need extra feeding aid, so that will be visible in the video. So let's start the video, Megan.
Meet the feed dog. As you take a stitch and the needle enters the fabric, the feed dog drops under, and then it will rise again at the front and move straight out to the back to feed the fabric in a box feed motion. That box feed motion is what makes BERNINA's feed fabric so efficiently. Enters the BERNINA dual feed. You'll notice that it's in the up position. When you engage it, the presser foot should be up. When you lower the presser foot, the teeth of the dual feed will make contact with those of the feed dog. They are offset by half a tooth, which means the peaks of one will mesh into the valleys of the other. When you start sewing, there's no fabric back there typically when you have the presser foot and everything, so that the teeth will be metal on metal. If they were tooth to tooth, they would scuff each other. This way, they give you perfectly good motion without wearing each other out. So as you can see, as a result, as the feed dog rises up, the dual feed bracket will lower down and make contact with the fabric right above the center pad of the feed dog and help coordinate a pull of the fabric towards the back. The walking foot offers a much larger surface area in double transport, and it is actuated by the fork that goes up and down. That fork will be engaged with the needle clamp, and that is what will drive it. When the fork moves up and down, you can see that the pads below are moving in the opposite direction, so the fork is driving them. Now to attach the walking foot, you'll notice that it has the standard cone adapter for the presser foot bar. But in the front, there is a notch, a diagonal notch, that will allow you to slide it laterally. If you position the walking foot from the back, you'll be mounting it as a diagonal towards the front. So to attach the walking foot, simply raise the fork, hold it up with your thumb, and then while holding the back with your middle finger, you can now position the walking foot so that the fork engages the needle clamp first, then mount to the presser foot bar and simply clamp with the other hand. That's it. Your walking foot is attached and is ready to go. It will behave like a standard presser foot with the added traction. Now let's watch the walking foot in action. As you take a stitch, the driving pads are retracted, and as the needle retracts, then the pads are down and on the fabric, pulling backwards along with the feed dog for the same length of stitch. Notice also that at the bottom, the front of the pads is tapered. That is to avoid them snagging into thick layers, which is commonly what the walking foot is used for. That makes for efficient feed over even uneven terrain.
Okay, so that's the difference between the two. Basically, the walking foot has a much larger surface area, and it will basically do 5 times the pull. There's a few variations also that go with that. So to give you the meat and potatoes, what the two are and what they do similarly but not quite exactly, let's go through the slides. Just to confirm, Megan, are my slides visible at this point?
No, you're still on your desktop.
Aha.
On
Okay.
your second screen.
Yeah. There you go. I had it there, but it defaulted back. Okay, so you see here them both in action. This is a 5 series, the current 5 series Bernina. You see the dual feed here engaged. Notice there's a screw here. The last piece, the tip of the dual feed on all the machines that have it, the 5, 7, and 8 series, the tip portion with the teeth is replaceable. So if you did 100,000 miles on that thing, you could have the tip replaced if the teeth ever wear out. Because remember, at the beginning, there's a bit of metal on metal. And if you sew a lot without fabric, in 10 years, maybe you might need to service that part. It's easy enough to do. And then you have the walking foot here. This is a version of the current walking foot. So the feed dogs, when you start without any feeding aid, a regular presser foot number 1C, for instance, the feed dog on a Bernina, the teeth are not just a little pointed tooth like this, and there's a whole set of them. Now, what Bernina does is it cuts off the tip of that. So the part that would be just a sharp line becomes a little bit of a flat tip. And then that means that there's a leading edge in front and in back. So for reverse cycle stitches, whether you're going forward or in reverse, you get good grip on your fabric. So that helps mitigate giving you a good grab on your fabric. It helps mitigate the drift or the slide that happens normally. So the box feed motion also means that the feed dog comes up as one piece, moves back, and then goes down so that you have efficient feed. Old machines like my old 830 from 1971, they had elliptical feed dog. And what the feed dog would do is it would come up at an angle like this in a round motion. So in the middle, it's flat and fully exposed. But at the beginning and at the end of the stroke, part of the feed dog is sunken in. So you don't get 100% efficiency. The Bernina 930 in 82 introduced the box feed and made the feed more efficient. And you notice the difference when you have a machine like that. All current Berninas do that box feed motion. So we have etched teeth, and know that the little baby Bernina 325 entry-level machine, which is a slightly smaller head, and the big, the big flagship 880 have the same metal, cut the same way, just bigger or smaller depending on the size of the machine and the size of the stitch the machine can do. But the quality of the material is the same. And Bernina feed dogs are hardened. They're very hard. So people will tell you, oh yeah, you can sew over pins on a Bernina. It's not gonna wear out your feed dog like some cheap soft metal feed dogs might. You don't want to sew over pins anyway, because what happens is that if your sewing machine needle hits that pin the wrong way, it could deflect, bend, and break, and the shard could fly. And I've once found a shard in the drywall next to me. I didn't wear glasses back then, so it went that way as opposed to me way. I was lucky. So I've learned never sew over pins again. So that's a little pointer there. So where it won't damage the feed dogs, you could damage yourself. So that's for the way the feed dog is made. Now enter the dual feed. Dual feed is basically a supplemental feeding mechanism. And you notice that when the feed dog was coming up, the dual feed was approaching from the back and above before it lowered itself to meet the feed dog. So it is very well timed to the mechanism. It's on the 8, 7, and 5 series, current series. The old 5 series, and in the internet age, old may be like 3 years ago, right? So the old 5 series did not have dual feed, but the new 5 series does. Now it's only on the 9mm capable machines for a good reason. On a 5.5mm machine, the foot is narrow enough and the feed dog is too narrow. You don't have room to get dual feed in there. So you need some space. So that's it works better on the wider machines. It matches that little pad at the rear or the feed dog. It's exactly meshed to it as you saw in the video. And on the 8 series, there's a little perk. On the 5 and 7 series, it is synchronized 1-to-1 with the feed dog. It moves with the feed dog. You saw it on the video. That was 1-to-1. That was a 790. Now on the 8 series, you can make it go a little faster than the feed dog or a little slower. I would say slower is rare, but if you have a very plush fabric, think Sherpa fleece, double-sided polar fleece, stuff that's, I call it like dog fur. When the feed dog hits it, it's kind of petting it, but there's enough teeth to make it go. The dual feed is a little smaller. It may be petting the dog and not having the effect that you would count on. So you could actually, on the 8 series, you can accelerate the dual feed so that it will compensate for that and keep up with the effect of the feed dog. So that is only available on the 8 series. It's an I function. You see the little dual feed, and then you just crank it up. It starts at level 0, which is parity. And if you go to level 2, you've made it faster. So it's pretty straightforward to use. And then on the 5 and 7 series, it is set 1-to-1. Frankly, I rarely ever, on my 880, I rarely ever have changed the speed of it. I'm used to 1-to-1 and it works very well. And if you don't try to force feed the fabric, it actually works even better because you let the machine do the feeding, then things stay synchronized. Because when you push the fabric, you're favoring the fabric underneath more than the one on top. Even though your eyes see the top fabric, you're helping the lower fabric, the under fabric better. So I just let the machine feed it then, and the two work well together. So the benefits of dual feed, obviously 5 times the convenience. It combines with existing presser feed. That is huge. It's instant. When you put the foot on the machine, a D foot, like 1D, which is included with all the machines that have dual feed, all you do is your head is flat like this, and you slide it, you pet your machine, you slide it on the back panel of the machine. You don't grab anything, you don't angle your hand, you do nothing. You just slide your hand, and it will, there's a little nook, a little knob, if you want, your pinky will meet that, it will push it down, it engages. That's it. The key is the foot needs to be up when you engage it, so there's clearance for that bracket to come, because the bracket comes from just under the foot before it snaps in. Okay, so it's instant to engage and disengage. Foot must be up for both operations, nice and easy. And it actually enhances feed on a variety of presser feet. So if there's 10 D feet or so, and each one has like 3, 4, 5 applications, it's more like 50 times the convenience there, but we'll leave it at 5 times. And I use it on my regular sewing. I pretty much put number 1D foot on my 790, my 830, that's my own machine, my loaner 880 from work. I put 1D on, engage the dual feed most of the time. It is rare that I will go back to a C foot, but I'll touch back on C versus D later on. And for regular sewing, whether I'm piecing quilts, whether I'm fixing a garment, anything, I will use the dual feed most times. So it is great for just about any regular sewing, quilt piecing. A little tip when you do quilt piecing, and I learned that from Debbie Ketchamani, one of my colleagues. You know, when you have your butted seam allowances, when you do a cross seam while you're piecing, they are prone to want to separate a little bit. That's from the squish. You know, the one that has not reached, the one piece that has not reached the stitch point yet is being held back by the foot, where the other one is being pulled by the feed dog and the stitches that lead it. So they want to separate a little bit. It's physics. They're going to want to do that anyway. So what you can do is you use a dual feed that already mitigates that. And then the secret sauce is you go to the presser foot pressure and you lower it by about half. And then there's less of that foot, remember, that's causing some of that drag to separate them. That's alleviated as well. So the two effects together, it flows right through. You don't have to worry about it. So it does work. I've tried it. It does work very well. So whether it's garment constructions, quilt piecing, I use it all the time. Now for quilting, you can do the quilting stitch, you know, not the stippling in this case, but like if you want to do straight line quilting, echo line quilting, that type of thing. Traditionally, we would use the walking foot for that. But if it's a smaller project, lightweight enough, a mug rug, a pot holder, even a table runner, if it's not too heavy, you can actually do it with a dual feed. It's sufficient. But I do art quilts. They have embroidery stabilizers, a lot of thread. They are heavy. A 5x7 foot quilt for a wall piece is almost 20 pounds. The dual feed cannot haul that. It's not enough for that. It's just that tiny little area on the back. That calls for the big measures. That's the walking foot. And I'll get back to the walking foot in a second. So tips for using the dual feed. The foot needs to be up to engage and disengage it. Nice and simple. And of course, it engages after the foot is up, is put on, and it is disengaged first before the foot comes off. That's pretty straightforward. And always use a D foot when you use the dual feed. And I'll show an example of what would happen if you use a C foot with a dual feed. It's not a good plan. All right, so the walking foot now. Walking foot is 5 times the performance, right? More surface area. It's a larger surface. So, I'll show you later that the back little pad on the walking foot matches the size of the one on the dual feed, plus all the 2 long pads on the sides that match those columns of the feed dog. So, and what happens with the walking foot is that if you have your stitching point here, those 2 pads, they reach ahead of the stitch point. They land down, they move the fabric to the stitch, and they keep doing this until it's past the stitch. So you have very strong longitudinal control. Keep your seam lined up, whether you're stitching in the ditch, you're edge stitching on the binding, anything like that, it helps you keep things lined up. So the walking foot is really, really, really good for that. There are 3 soles available for it. The regular sole has metal in front and back of the needle. So it surrounds the needle with a slab of metal. That is good for matching plaids. That's your traditional walking foot. If you use one 20, 30 years ago, that's what the sole would have looked like. So it's great for that. There is an open toe one, which I use for quilting, and it gives you visibility. You can see there's nothing between you and the needle. I like it. It's with the bifocals and all that, I really like it. I use it also for edging my quilts. If I do a self-binding from the back, I double turn the fabric back to the front, so I can have 1 pad of the walking foot on the binding, 1 on the quilt itself. So 3 layers, 3 plus 2, that's 5. And then it keeps that lined up, and I can butt the fold, the edge of the binding with 1 of the toes, move my needle, because on a BERNINA, you can always move your needle to the sweet spot, and I can just go. And I tell you, a 20-pound quilt, I tested this at slow speed, like stitch by stitch. I had the thing rolled up on my shoulder. It was in the harp, and every time the machine took a stitch, that quilt would tug away from me. It's that strong. The dual feed would not be able to haul a 20-pound quilt. It will, a 2-pound quilt, maybe 3-pound quilt, but not 20. The walking foot will do that for you. And then there's a third sole with a centered guide. You can use it for edge joining, following the edge of a binding if you like. My eye-brain coordination is trained long-term since a long time ago with the open toe sole. So it's like I don't have to think how I'm going to do it. It's like if you know how you do your white sauce in the kitchen, you always do it the same way. Why reinvent that wheel, right? So I keep using the same sole. But I have used it for some binding applications, for instance, or stitch in the ditch. It's great for that. It lets you follow that ditch. So the soles are easy to replace. They all three come with a walking foot. You're all covered when you open the box. So the walking foot, the Bernina walking foot is a piece of precision equipment, just like your machine. It runs at full speed. It runs quietly. You listen to competitor walking feet, you hear clacking sounds, not on the Bernina walking foot, and it is serviceable. I have a friend who pieces with it, quilts with it, it never comes off the machine. So that thing has 100,000 miles on it in like 10, 15 years. If you use it all the time, good for you. You can actually have it cleaned. When you drop your machine off every year for its little TLC, your technician in the store calls this a clean, oil, and adjust. Those three things are important. They'll find any little thing that needs to be just tweaked, back into perfection. And if you let them see your walking foot, you can tell them, can you check on it? They will put the drop of oil inside. They will clean it up for you. It will last you a long, long time. So I've had walking feet for over 20 years, and I don't use them all the time, but I've never had to have them serviced. So somebody asked this morning, do I need to oil it? You don't need to oil it. But if you have it every 2, 3, 5 years, you include it with your machine, whatever, your technician will look at it and clean it, open it. Doesn't take long, clean it, oil it, you're good to go. Okay, so that's for the walking foot. It's great for your heavier projects or whenever you need very strong longitudinal control. For instance, the quilt binding. If you have a pad on the quilt, a pad on the binding, your binding, sometimes it wants to shear a little bit because it's more layers. It's dragging the foot a little more. And sometimes because it wants to pull a little bias and you can see a little bubbly, barely perceptible sometimes. That's from the differential drag under the foot. Well, the walking foot says, I don't care. You're coming both at the same rate. So that doesn't happen. Love that. Home deck projects. If you're going to work with upholstery projects, if you're going to I have friends in California who have a sailboat. Once in a while, the sun eats up the canvas to cover the boat parts. So they need to sew that stuff. The walking foot is great there because if it's oil, fabric, and all that, it will just go to town on this and, no questions asked. So it's good for the heavy duty stuff. For quilting, machine quilting, of course, it's great. And it comes with guides, seam guides. So you could do, I call it Harlequin quilting. If you want to do like cross grid quilting, you can have equidistant lines very easily without having to think. And I use it especially for all my quilt bindings. I would not rely on the dual feed because it's too small. It doesn't really have much of an effect to correct the differentials between the quilt and its binding. And then for precision stitching, of course, matching plaids, that would work well as well. I have shirts that are plaid that are really nice, dense cotton. It reminds me almost of a batik, not in pattern, but in texture of cotton, so tightly woven. Those you would put dual feed, those plaids would match from A through Z. But I did a little made to create video with a soft, very soft flannel plaid. That's a twill, and it wasn't very tightly woven. So with the dual feed, I could still get a little creep because the flannel is so soft that it would not behave. With the walking foot, you're coming. The two pads would keep it together. So you can't go wrong. Either way, dual feed, walking foot, I have both. People ask all the time, do I need both? The answer is yes. 95% of the time, you're going to use the dual feed. But that 5%, when it gets critical, you're going to go and you're going to use the walking foot. So you're covered if you have both. Okay, so tips for using the walking foot. Of course, the presser foot needs to be in the up position because you need to get that whole module under there. But the old days, until 1997, up to this Bernina 1630, that old, what I call vintage machines walking foot. I have a 1260 still. So I have that walking foot. We had to approach at 90 degrees and then engage the fork and then turn the walking foot to mount it. There was a hang to it. Once you had it, you were good, but it took a few sessions to get the fingers to collaborate and to work together to make that happen. So nowadays, they made that diagonal slit. So you just position the walking foot from the back, and then you're just going to slant it, but its orientation stays towards you. So you don't have to turn anything. It's a little easier that way. Okay, so you put it at the back and you engage it. The fork comes first. And then to change the soles, there are 3 soles. The soles are basically snapped in by the metal. The metal sole has prongs, and so basically you take it off, but you loosen the screw on the side of the module first, as the screwdriver is included, and then you put the new sole in. I mount the foot on the machine first, because that way it holds it for me. It's like an incidental freehand system. It's another one. So I put it up, and then you just loosen the housing, the little white housing of the walking foot. It spreads out, the sole plops out. You put a new one in, just tighten it up, you're done. So you get one hand on the sole, one hand on the screwdriver, nice and easy. Okay, and then the walking foot, as I said, gives you very good longitudinal control, right? From before the fabric is stitched, through the stitch point, and further back. That means it does not like to go around curves. It likes straight line. So if you need to go around curves, what do? You pivot. You pivot Chicago style. You pivot early and you pivot often. So with the freehand system, you develop this 2-step thing where nudge the bar, pivot the fabric just a hair, few stitches, pivot, even if it's a tight curve. The walking foot will go around a curve. You just need to navigate that curve. The dual feet is at the back of the foot, so you can still steer more freely with that. But the walking foot, the price to pay for absolute control on your fabric is that in curves, you will have to navigate the curve, not expect it to just shear into the curve, which that's a win-win for me. Okay, now there are variations of the walking foot. I'm going to go briefly over that here. It's in the slides. You can download this as a PDF. And if you have questions on this, you go to your call your local Bernina store. You tell them what machine or machines, plural, you are wanting to equip with a walking foot, and they will tell you what you need. But briefly, in the olden days, I have 7 Berninas from 1945 to 1993. So there's one walking foot that covers the vintage machines. And I love my 1260. It's like my first Berninas. So I will always love that machine. It's my first love, right? So there is one walking foot. That's the one that mounted at 90 degrees. And it is still available today because people will still buy a machine, or grandma gave them a machine, or the walking foot after 30 years finally wore out. You need a new one. We still have that. So that's walking foot number 1 for the vintage machines. Usually the vintage products are in red boxes, where the current generations of machines the accessories are in white packaging. So, but this one is still available. And the last model is the 1630, made in 97. Then arrived the Artistas with embroidery, and the Activa, Virtuosa, and basically all the way to the old 5 series that kind of departed about 3-4 years ago. That was launched since 97. Those machines, we introduced a needle threader. Number 1 requested feature that was not on Bernina's. We had to get a built-in needle threader. So that pushed the press-a-foot bar further by a 1/4 inch further back to make room for the needle threader to get there behind the needle. The walking foot had to be redone too. So new walking foot. And yeah, people don't like to repurchase the same equipment, but there was no way to fit that. You would have been breaking needles. So we have a new walking foot that works with those machines. That one has a black fork. And then the new machines, like in 2008, the 8 series, and typically what Bernina has been doing is re-engineer the top of the line and then work their way back down the series. So the 8 series came out in 2008. I have an 830 from that year. Those machines are taller. You can actually pass your whole hand underneath the foot when it's up, where normally it would butt into a foot on a regular machine. On the 8 series, I have a large man's size hands, nothing special, but I can pass my whole hand under the foot. There's more clearance. And the take-up lever is taller too. It's a big machine. So the fork had to be changed for the mechanism to work with these taller machines. It's just progress. My previous car had 15-inch wheels. My Corolla-based car today has 16-inch wheels. I could not keep the winter tires from one car to the other. It's just for that progress, I could not bring all the equipment with me. Same thing here. So after the introduction of the 830, and that includes also the 7 series today, which is tall, and the 5 series is a little bigger than your conventional sewing machine as well. So that walking foot has a silver fork. It's the one you saw in the first picture at the beginning of the slides. And it basically covers all the machines made today. And if you have an Artista 180 and you decide to ask from 97, you decide to add the walking foot, it works backwards all the way to 1997. There's only one made today. There's basically 2 walking feet today. Vintage machines, silver fork for all the machines made since 97. If you, like me, had the black fork in 1997 for your Artista, it works still on my Artista 200, but it doesn't work on my 880. I had to get the silver fork for that one. That's because those machines, once you go past 10 inches, 12 inches, everything's bigger, and the mechanism has to fit. So that's for that. And I will show you visuals now. We can actually, I will stop sharing my screen, and I will show you a visual of the walking feet. So vintage machines, you're covered. If you need a walking foot, call your local BERNINA store. They will have the vintage compatible walking foot. There's only one. And if you have an Artista 200 like me, and in 97, well, it's from 2002, but in 97, I got me a walking foot. It was the one with this is a new style, but it has the black fork, okay? That does not work on the big machines. But if you buy a walking foot today, there's only one. Is this one that I showed in the video with the silver fork. And that silver fork, because the machines go taller, some of the machines, it has to work with the tall machines. It has a lip on the side. Let me see if I can show you the lip. You see that it's not just flush, there's a little lip on the side. That means it will glide better when the machine zigzags. The needle clamp where the fork grabs onto, that has basically to slide against the needle clamp. So that new fork actually will allow the bigger motion to be smoother, which is important. So a little tip here. When you get your walking foot, it comes in that box with everything in the box, right? The screwdriver, everything included, your soles, one is mounted, that's it. What I do on mine is I take because I keep this in the drawer, I flatten the flaps into the box. I keep the instructions. I'm going to lose my guide card one day. I actually read the instructions on everything. So put the instructions down there. That was the top cap for the styrofoam. Goes down first, and then I put the other one. I don't have a tray. It's, so everything goes back there. I never have to look for it because there's a lot of stuff in the sewing room. It can get messy. That works very well. If you take your walking foot with you, the accessory case that we introduced a year or so ago, it has the high density foam trays. Your BSR, if you have one, can go in there. Bobbins, your presser feet, and your walking foot can go in there. And so that's good where you could travel with it. But then when you're at home, you just take the trays out and it's right there next to you. You can use it. So that's actually a more portable solution that is equivalent. So that's for the walking foot. That's the heavy duty. It has the guide bars, the seam guides. There's one for each side, a left and a right. And there's a bracket that goes on the back. So you're all covered. You can do a lot of work with that walking foot. For the dual feed, as you saw, it goes into the back of the foot. And the D feet, this is number 20D. The D feet have this cutout. One question we get a lot is, if I put a D foot on, do I have to engage the dual feed? And the answer is yes. Otherwise, there's a chunk of the foot missing. I learned something recently, actually. My mother's motto was, "My day's not wasted if I learn something," and that struck with a chord with me. I learned recently that when you select the thread tension on your needle, and you either the default for the stitch or you lowered it because you're doing satin stitch, anything like that, that thread tension is the way it's yanking the thread. Is this, the tension discs are pressing on the thread, but the last piece of removing slack in the stitch, so the last step in implementing, if you want, or effectuating that thread tension, is when the feed dog moves the fabric forward to the next stitch. So about 2 or 3 millimeters, whatever your stitch length is. So that's the last thing. So if you have a D foot and you don't engage the dual feed, when that last step is done, when the fabric is being moved towards the back, there's nothing holding the fabric down there. The fabric could flag up a little bit. So when the thread's being pulled up, if the fabric flags with it, it may hang on to it. And then when things are allowed to come back down, there may be a slack underneath. You may have loose stitch or a skip stitch for that matter. So we were told by our head technician, Hans, you will use a dual feed when you use a D foot. So we do. So, and I said 5 times the convenience, right? And I said that it combines with a variety of pressure feeds. So number 2, going back to 20D, this is your open toe. We just call this satin stitch foot, right? It has this tunnel underneath. And the beauty of these feet is that they basically allow the satin stitch to form without snagging, without stalling. So that's good. But sometimes you need that little extra tension, traction at the back. A couple of things here. If you do satin stitch, people who do a lot of satin stitch will tell you, you never start right at the satin stitch setting, those old cross hatches that you see on your screen or on your machine. You don't start there. You start like at a 0.5 stitch length, which is a little too long. That's an open zigzag a little bit. And then you shorten it gradually until you like it before it stops, right? So people who do love applique know that. And if you use the same fabric all the time on a computerized Bernina nowadays, you save it in memory, in permanent memory, your satin stitch is ready to go next time. But with the dual feed, the chance of stalling is basically not quite removed completely, but almost. So that's good. Foot number 1D is just a good old foot number 1, right? And it has a dual feed at the back. So added tension. This is now my all-purpose sewing foot. It's the one I use the most. Foot number 8, jeans foot, right? So jeans foot, you know, is very good for straight stitch. It's good for heavy-duty projects. You can even use heavy thread, like that jeans thread, or if you're using like specialty coated thread for sun exposure, outdoor applications, then this foot is awesome. It has that little groove here for the thread to lie flat as it's stitched and then go, move to the back. And if you engage the dual feed here, because we often use this with heavy stuff like jeans hems, outdoor projects, upholstery, great for straight stitching on anything that's difficult. So dual feed with this is that much better. Number 10D, edge joining foot. We don't join edges that much. If you do heirloom sewing, you might, but most of us use this as an edge stitching foot, right? And I did some edge joining. I wanted to put 2 pieces of quilt batting together. You do the gathering stitch. So you can actually put these 2 pieces together. If you look from a yard away, you would not know there were 2 pieces when you started. But when you have to guide 2 big pieces like this, if you try to steer a little too much, you know that they may bubble a little bit, and then you may see a little bit of warping here and there, not quite 100%. Same if you want to attach a piece of lace to a piece of fabric. By using the dual feed, I did not expect this. That was a nice surprise perk. Because the dual feed was at the back, when I let the 2 pieces go against the guide, the dual feed at the back was tracking them for me, adding a longitudinal tracking pull, which means they tended to stay together. I didn't have to correct or check them as much. So I got better edge joining with the dual feed. I did not expect that. It made me raise an eyebrow. I was like, yeah, this is nice. So that was a freebie. Zipper foot also comes. There's a whole variety, right? Even 34D, which is a clear foot, for decorative purposes. Decorative stitches with dual feed means extra precision, especially when you form a little leaf, a flower, or whatever. It gives you that extra precision going back and forth so that your decorative stitches look better. And here's one that I teach. I use in a class that I teach. It's this is 52D. I feel like I'm playing presser foot bingo. It's a non-stick foot, and it has dual feed. There's an exercise I teach in that class. We take leatherette, like pleather, but with that flannel backing. And to make it worse, to show what happens sometimes with leatherette, we put it wrong sides together. So like clingy sides out on the bed of the machine and under the foot. We use a regular foot number 1, no D. We sew. When you're done, the 2 layers, because of the differential, the feed dog moved this layer, but this one was clinging to the foot. So they basically, the fabric does this. It cups up at the back like big time. Then we take then we take the foot 52D, just the non-stick, no dual feed yet. We just put the foot and we do the same thing. and then it cups only about half as much because the stress is partially relieved because the non-stick coating did its part. And then we do a third one with the dual feed and the non-stick, and it lies flat like if it was quilting cotton. And that example makes the best case for both non-stick and dual feed. So if you want to do like upholstery fabrics, right sides together, that rubberized coarse coating on the back, you know, that stuff doesn't behave very well. That's your ticket. And a dual feed is half the recipe there. So that is for dual feed versus walking foot. I use them both all the time. I use a dual, I'm on the 65% more often dual feed, and it's on by default. So maybe 75% in my case. But whenever things get heavier, bulkier, I go for the walking foot. And then best of both worlds, I get the traction I need whenever I need. So with that, it would be a good time to go for questions.
All right, thank you, Sylvain. Awesome. Well, speaking of, you know, you using dual feed more often than the walking foot, do you have a favorite dual feed foot?
Oh, you're asking me to choose between my children. Actually, well, 1D, because by default, if you want. Otherwise, I want to say 10D. It has really done, you know, it's really elevated that foot, which is already most people's favorite foot, and it's put it over the top. So yeah, but it's a toss. It's a toss. Yeah.
I agree. 10D is mine with, you know, garment sewing and having to edge stitch and top stitch. So
yes, and I just remembered, I forgot to mention one thing. This is a C foot, number 1C. It comes with a machine that has a 1D, right? Because you don't always want to use the dual feed. So this is a C foot. It's flat. Let me put that closer to the camera. So if you engage a dual feed bracket under a C foot, I mentioned earlier that you don't want to do that. What will happen is the bracket will find its way under the foot and nudge it up like this. Because the foot, see that? The foot will be basically elbow, you know, ankle itself up. That means that there's no longer contact between the foot and the fabric. It's being wedged up. That means that you don't have traction anymore. So, and you'll see the bracket will be a little harder to get out of there because it doesn't want to go there. It's not supposed to. So if you have a C foot and you engage a dual feed and your machine's feeding wonky or not feeding wonky, then check that you don't have a C foot. It's, you know, late at night, sometimes my sight's not what it used to be. You're tired, you don't pay attention. Happens to me. So that, you know, you'll do that once and it won't break a needle, but it will not feed like a Bernina.
there we go. And just like the morning session, we keep getting asked, is there a 9mm walking foot or stitch plate that accommodates that?
There is not at this time, and we've been asking Santa for this for a long time. Here's the deal. I mentioned that when you have the, you know, the needle clamp, when you screw in your needle on your machine, that needle clamp is where the fork goes. So so picture this is your needle, this is the clamp, right? So this is a walking foot. When you do a zigzag, that needle clamp needs to go in a slide, and the fork is going to move up and down with it, but it needs to slide in. The fork needs to slide against it. So if you want to go from 5.5 to 9mm, you're adding almost 3mm each way. So when the thing goes close this way, like that would be on the right, you'd have to basically push the fork out on the assembly, on the walking foot. The walking foot would have to be bigger, wider to move that fork out. And then on the other side, when it moves away, the current one would escape. The fork would fall down. So you'd have to make that clamp even longer. It would get to be almost 1/2 inch long or more, actually. And that becomes a break hazard. And if your fingers under the fabric are under that thing, you could thump it onto your fingers. So they have not come out with a bigger walking foot at this point. I'm not sure if we ever will. We keep asking. We keep asking. And I know I like those big, oversized, you know, feather stitches, you know, the crazy ones. Love that. I would love with a 30 weight cotton thread, you can do some crazy stuff with that. But for now, it's 5.5mm width. So I will take the traction, the variety of soles, everything else first. And to me, 9mm would be dessert, but we'll see.
Yep, it's on the wish list. It's on the wish list.
It is. It is. It is. We're wishing really hard.
Exactly. And we're getting a couple of questions just about like the newer and the older walking foot. So with that, the middle tier walking foot, the one made after 1997, but not for the newer machine models, is that capable at all of being used on the newer machine models? Would you suggest it?
No, I had to rework on a quilt when on my 830 I had the black fork walking foot, and that's when I realized it was too small. It did not. It let go of the fabric at the wrong time. Now on a 4 series today, 3 series, and we just retired the 2 series, like the 215. On those, yes, if you have the black fork walking foot, it will work up to that. On the 5 series, I am not sure. I would have to check. I have my doubts because that machine is already larger than the machines that were in existence when that black fork walking foot was designed. And remember, it's precision. There's a word, it's a dirty geometry word. It's called angular momentum, right? The mechanism has to time based on the motion and the length of the stroke, the duration of the stroke. And so that walking foot will not work on a current 7 and 8 series for sure. And I have my doubts on the 5 series. So I have both because I have an Artista 200. I got it for a 180 before that. If you have an Artista 600 series, 630, 640, an Aura, it's the black. If you have the black fork walking foot, you do not need to replace it. Okay. So, and if you have if you purchase a 7 series and you say, you know what, when I need to do walking foot work, I'll just do it on the Aura because I have that walking foot. That's good. A perfect straight stitch is never obsolete. All right. That's my policy. So, and there are times I will take out the Artista 200 for stuff that I need to do on the side while the 880 is embroidering, for instance. So there's nothing wrong there. But if you need a walking foot today, know that the only one sold for the current generation of machines works on all. From 1997 and on, it works on all of them. So that it's backwards compatible basically.
Perfect. And one final question just to kind of wrap up the webinar. Before I ask, I just want to remind everyone to download those handouts now. If not, they will be available a little bit later, but give you a little bit of time for this. Go ahead, Sylvain.
Yes, now that you mentioned the handouts, once you've done them, they're kind of out of mind. The one is slides. The other one is a list of resources, projects and articles on wealso.com. There's one article written by Susan Beck. She's the mother of Pressofeet. Actually, Susan Beck teaches all the Pressofeets in one 3-day class. So she went in details the difference between both and examples of feet and applications. So that would be your backup. If you read this, what I said today will make more sense. And then there's project ideas where you can use them, whether it's dual feet or walking foot. So you'll see, and then there's a product information on the website and YouTube videos from Bernina International, YouTube videos. And by the way, reminder, if you have not subscribed to the Bernina International YouTube channel, please do. You can, whenever there's a new video, it may be about an overlock technique, it may be about a garment technique, anything, you get to see that stuff. You may not make the garment, but you may pick up a top stitching tip, right? So there's information about YouTube videos that relate to these two feeding aids today. So.
Perfect, thank you. Your last question is, what is the thickest and what is the thinnest fabrics you have sewn through? And did you use the walking foot or dual feed?
Some of my colleagues would say, don't encourage him.
The people want to know, Sylvain. The people want to know.
thinnest, okay? It was a sheer linen, really top-notch stuff for a sheer for like a patio door, so you could just tame the sun in the afternoon. And people would say back then that you could not do like fancy, very thin fabrics like this on a 9mm machine. I went to town on that thing. Thickest. It was multiple layers of polar fleece and tote bags. I had a bag, it was a bag that had tapestry fabric on the outside, cotton liner, and I can't remember what it was called, but it was a structural type of fleece, Decobond, I think it was called, that you put in the middle. And then when you box the bag on the bottom, you have like 12 layers, okay? But that's when, foot of the day, that's when Bernina has this magic formula, right? Foot number 8. Any flavor of foot number 8, straight stitch plate, size 110 sharp, like jeans needle. I had broken 5 needles trying to box the 1 inch at the bottom. And I'm like, I'm an educator already at Bernina, and I go like, okay, supposedly the monkey is already trained, right? That's how I call myself when I make mistakes. And I'm like, what? Okay, now re-engage brain. So, oh yeah. So I put this in place, 1 needle, 30 seconds later, all sewn. That was thick. That was thick. And I've had, well, I've done actually a Made to Create video on a baby BERNINA 215, our little baby, like the little one, like the smallest. 12 layers of what I call Jethro denim, like the overall denim. Like the stuff is, if you put it in, it stands up. 12 layers of that, and the machine just went through it like butter. And that's something to say about BERNINA though. The baby machine and the flagship will cruise through the same 12 layers of denim. And this is not shirtweight denim. This is upholstery grade fabric. So that, and the thing is that when it gets too heavy, the walking foot will help you there. It will help move that bulk and that mass and that weight along. So that's when I would use the walking foot actually. Or if it's not too thick, like the bag, I would use number 8. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Again, this webinar is recorded, so it will be posted to bernina.com. I hope before the end of this week, over the weekend, but you will get an email on how to access all of that along with the handouts if you didn't get those downloaded. I think that's all I have. Sylvain, any final thoughts?
No, enjoy your sewing, and as I say, never be out of traction.
All right. If you have any final questions, we encourage you to talk to your local BERNINA dealers, and we hope you enjoyed our webinar today. Thanks, everyone.